Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. What we're going to do is we're going to run through a bit of a concept. It's a lot of times it's talked about as layered security, but just to have some fun with it, we talk about it in terms of the Swiss cheese model for risk. And essentially, this is we're going to talk about how it relates to cybersecurity and strategies that you can use to help protect your business from risks that exist out in the internet. So first of all, we've got our agenda here. We're going to go through a bunch of different things. We're going to touch on them relatively quickly, and then make sure that we've got some time available at the end to answer any questions that you might have. So let's just jump right in. So the first thing, why are we here? Cybersecurity is the beginning, the middle, and the end of every single conversation that we have around technology. It's constantly evolving because the bad actors, the people that are trying to break into your networks, they are constantly developing. They're looking for vulnerabilities, both within your technology and within your processes, and ultimately trying to attack your business so that they can steal information, hold it ransom, and look to extract money, from your business. There's lots and lots of these cases that end up on the news. Most recently, a really big one over in the UK, Royal Mail got hit with a huge ransomware attack that I believe at this point they're still trying to recover from. It's impacted their ability to move parcels and basically carry on business. Closer to home in Canada, we've seen Indigo, chapters in Indigo, they've taken their webpage offline because of a cyber incident. And, the Toronto Hospital for Sick Kids, I think, got hit just not that long ago as well. Now, the thing about all of these, stories that I'm talking about is that they made the news. A small percentage of cyber incidents make the news. Many, many more happen kind of in the veil of secrecy within small and medium businesses. So we need to be particularly vigilant about how we are approaching cybersecurity so that we're minimizing our risk as business owners. So what is the Swiss cheese model? This is just, a fun way to visualize layers of protection that you could put in place in your business. You see from the little image here the idea that if you've got these pieces of Swiss cheese and you're using them to try to stop a cyber attack from impacting your business, the way those holes line up means that you have to have more than one piece, and it's a good illustration of cybersecurity, because there is no such thing as a single protective measure that you can put in place to, protect you from a cyber incident. So when we're talking about it today, we're going to talk about each of the individual layers and how it could be a technology control, it could be a personnel issue, those types of things. But ultimately, we want to be putting in layers of security so that each layer has a lower and lower likelihood of allowing a risk through that could impact your business. So the first layer we call the perimeter. So the perimeter is what is at the edge of your network. We're talking about firewalls, and there's a lot of different grades and levels of firewalls. And one of the interesting things about them is that in years past, a lot of businesses considered the firewall to be a bit of a set it and forget it type of protection. You put it in place, you go in, you put all your settings, the ports that you want to allow, the ones that you don't, and then you just walk away from it. Now, the thing is, the risks on the internet have grown exponentially. They now have to not just block forced entry into the network, but they also have to scan any of the files that your people are bringing into the network. They have to block, outbound access to certain types of, malicious content. And with all of that added, I guess, responsibility, firewalls have become much more complex, meaning they are computers. So they have to be managed, they have to be updated, they have to be patched. And we've actually seen in the last 6 months, Fortinet had a pretty significant vulnerability discovered on their firewalls. Cisco had a vulnerability they released on their firewalls. And basically what they were saying was that if you didn't go and update your firewall to patch that vulnerability, there were known bad actors that were taking control of those firewalls and by default gaining access into the network. Now, the other part of the perimeter that's become much more challenging to manage is your cloud-based perimeter. So if you're using Office 365, again, it has its own what's called a tenant that you need to manage what goes in and what goes out, through practices like multi-factor authentication and geographic restrictions and, all of those types of things that we're doing nowadays. So the perimeter is that first layer of defense. We're wrapping the business around and trying to make sure that anything coming in and out is, beneficial to the organization. The second layer we're going to talk about is the endpoint. So an endpoint can be anything that is, connecting to the network and accessing information and processing. And so, the most obvious examples of these are going to be your laptops, desktops. Maybe you have, smart boards in your boardrooms, mobile devices. And again, it's getting more and more complicated as time goes on, because if you walk around many, homes and businesses nowadays, you'll find things like smart thermostats. You'll find fridges and stoves that are connected to the network, fish tanks, you name it. There are many devices connected to a network. And so just like the perimeter layer, we need to make sure that only authorized devices have access to the network, and that all of those authorized devices have, layers within layers of protection. So some examples on an endpoint would be, we need to make sure that they're being properly patched and updated. We need to make sure that they've got, a good, high quality commercial grade antivirus and anti-ransomware solution. And then some of the more, advanced, tools out there are going to be things like tools where we can lock down an endpoint and only approve specific software. We call it application whitelisting or allowing. And the idea here is that we want to make sure that every single device on the network is held to the same standard as the others, that we're looking to block any malware and malicious code. Now, one other thing to think about when we're looking at endpoints, and it ties in with our next layer, is things like USB devices. Do we have a policy in place? And if needed, do we have restrictions on what can and can't be done with a USB storage device? For example, there are tools that we can use to make it so that you can't plug a USB drive into a computer and copy information onto it. This ties in with our third layer, which is the user layer. A lot of computer users aren't really aware of the power and the permissions that they have in using those computers. I give an example when I'm talking to clients all the time. I say, if we walked into the typical small and medium business. And, on that particular day, they had 10 new trucks lined up outside and 10 new laptops sitting on the boardroom table, ready to be, taken out, by the staff. Most businesses, the reality is they have more process and training and, procedures and restrictions around the vehicles than they do the computers. And the thing that's, as an IT person, that's a little bit, troubling and concerning about that is, of course, if somebody uses a truck outside of the scope of work. So let's say they, they decide to take the truck on a ski trip to Jasper on the weekend. And we know, like, that's personal use. They shouldn't be doing that. And they take that truck and it ends up in the ditch and, it's all smashed up. Well, you've taken one truck out of the fleet and hopefully the person's okay, right? We'll just ignore that part for now. Now, if somebody takes one of your business computers and does something unauthorized with it, maybe they decide they're going to, download movies. They found a free web page where they can get any of the movies that they want. And so they install some software on the computer and they start downloading this content. Well, if they end up on a malicious website and they get, malware installed on their computer and they infect that computer, that incident, that computer can actually ripple through and potentially impact the entire business. So we should actually spend a lot more time with our users, training them about cybersecurity awareness, teaching them about password policies. We talk about passwords a lot. I'll just reiterate really quickly. We want all passwords to be long, complex, and unique. So we have a whole nother presentation on that. But the users oftentimes are overlooked. A lot of small businesses, they think that all IT cybersecurity is about a subscription and an IT provider's responsibility. The reality is over 90% of security incidents start at the user layer, right? Through, just really a lack of knowledge and awareness. The data layer. So, I jokingly say, to clients that in the nicest way possible, I don't really care too much about your computer, about the device. What we care about is we care about the information that you're creating, storing, analyzing, right? And ultimately are using to deliver services to your clients, to support your staff and your vendors and all of those types of components. Now, the thing about the data layer is that this is the gold mine. When we think about all of the cyber incidents and attacks that are happening out there, this is what they're trying to get to. And for the last 5 years, the biggest threat, I would say, that the small businesses or business in general are facing is from ransomware. And so ransomware is a malicious program that gets into a network, scans around, finds anything that is, data, Word documents, Excel documents, database files, QuickBooks, accounting, all those types of things. It encrypts it. And then whoever was running that particular program, appears and says, hey, for the low price of fill in the blank, we will give you a key so you can unlock that data. We started this session talking about the Royal Mail incident. The ransom demand started at $80 million. And they did a bunch of back and forth negotiating. And it's really interesting, actually, because the ransomware group has released the chat logs that they had between them and Royal Mail, and you can actually see how this conversation went. And they ended up not paying the ransom, as far as they've told everybody. But that is what businesses have been facing. because you get into this situation where you can't operate your business because your data is locked up. So you need to have protections around your data. First, proper permissions to make sure that only the right people or the right programs have access to the information. Second, you need to make sure that you have, good, what we call air-gapped backups. And an air gap means it's not a USB stick plugged into the same device, but it is physically separated from your main network so that if something were to happen, you have a second and a third and a fourth copy of it in different locations on different mediums. So protecting your data, being able to restore from it is critical. I just want to add one thing. Cyber attackers have learned that businesses are doing a better job of backing their information up. And often they don't need to pay the ransom to be able to recover their information. They can do that from their backup. So instead, what these criminals are doing now is they are exfiltrating, meaning they are copying data out of your organization. And they basically say, if you pay us in the case of Royal Mail, if you pay us the $80 million, not only will we give you the decryption key, but we promise we won't publicly post the private information that we stole from your organization. And so this is really important because for small businesses, having personal, private, confidential information exposed creates a lot of problems. First, it could be that competitors or clients, they can now see exactly what you do, how you do it, what you charge, who your other customers are, whatever that information is. We like to keep that information close to us. But the second thing is it can create a significant problem in terms of both your reputation and having to disclose a data breach to your client base. And in Alberta, we have a mandatory reporting requirement that if even one person's personal information could be at risk, you actually have to disclose that. And there's a commission that reviews them, and they post this publicly. So you can go and you can search, Alberta data breach reporting, and right on the first page, you'll find the privacy Office of the Privacy Commissioner, I think it is, with that list on there. So really critical that you think about where it's stored, permissions, how it's backed up, and make sure that those recovery mechanisms are tested and verified, because your backup is only as good as your ability to recover from it. The fifth layer is the incident response layer. This is a really tough one for us as cybersecurity professionals, because we like to do as much proactive work as we can to try to avoid an incident and a breach and those types of things. But the reality is a breach can come in many different sizes and levels of impact. And there's a lot of, if you go and search out there, you'll find a lot of different really reputable sites and services and magazines and info sets that will say every business will be impacted by a cybersecurity incident to one degree or another. And there are businesses who have had that, and there's businesses that will have that. So you need to understand what is an appropriate incident response process. Who is involved? What do you tell outside parties? Simple things like using the word breach is actually a really important distinction, because the word breach has an actual legal definition. And it's kind of like if you get in a car accident, you never claim responsibility when you're at the scene of a crime or at the scene of an accident. Same thing in a cybersecurity incident. You want to be careful about the words that you're using and what you're telling who and when. And then you need to make sure that you have all of your other partners that should be involved in an incident response scenario. Things like your legal team, your public relations, communications teams. There might be a forensic investigation. Obviously your IT provider, and the more you can, visualize and anticipate in advance how you would respond if there were a cybersecurity incident. I don't want to say the easier it's going to be, because it's not easy, but the more confident you can be that you will be able to respond appropriately and minimize the long-term and the follow-up impacts from a cyber incident. So we said this was going to be a quick one, and like we said, the Swiss cheese model, it's really just, again, a tool to visualize this idea that in order to secure your network and protect you from cybersecurity risks, you need to implement multiple layers of controls and protections to ensure that the fewest number of those bad actors, those malicious activities, get through into your network, and that if something does get through, that you have quick control to be able to lock things down. How you're going to respond to it, because you've already developed those plans and worked through those strategies.